the moment Diane tore the bright pink wrapping paper and yellow ribbons from the box, the doll captured her full attention. Staring in wonder at the ragdoll, the young girl quickly hugged her mother. It was the same doll she had longed for at the downtown street market 2 weeks prior. At that time, it sat sad and neglected on a dusty shelf, with a torn limb and ratty clothes. Diane was irresistibly drawn to it. Such a pretty doll shouldn't have been left alone in such disrepair. Yet she couldn't bring herself to ask her mother for it. Money was tight after her mother's surgery, and she was still treading carefully after her latest bout of mischief at school. Her mother loved antiques, and Diane frequently accompanied her on hunts for timeless pieces. On that fateful day 2 weeks ago, Diane and her mother had found one particular treasure, a beautiful Victorian-style bedside table. In her mother's hands, even the shoddiest antiques gained a new luster. Diane watched the painstaking restoration process with awe. "She's beautiful," the girl exclaimed, hugging her mother fiercely. "How did you know, Mom?" "A mother knows, my dear. Happy birthday," Vivian replied, planting a soft kiss on her daughter's chubby cheek. The girl beamed, tucking a stray wisp of mousy hair behind her ear. "Well, those antiques won't restore themselves." Vivian smiled brightly. Her footsteps thudded heavily on the stairs, painfully reminding Diane of the accident that had changed so much. Burying those thoughts, she focused on the rag doll again. The doll had red wool for hair, obsidian glass beads for eyes, and a red felt triangle for a nose. The torn limb was carefully sewn, showcasing her mother's expert, barely there stitching. Adorned in white silk pajamas and red and white striped bed socks, the doll exuded charm. Clockwork dolls typically had gears and tiny oil stains on their dresses, sometimes emitting sporadic puffs of steam that added to their mass appeal. But this doll was different, a rare rag doll from before the nuclear disaster and medical revolution. "I'm going to call you Diane, just like me," the girl announced. For a fleeting moment, the cotton stitches of the doll's half-moon smile appeared to stretch wider. Perhaps it was just Diane's imagination. "You seem happier now," she murmured to the doll. For just an instant, she thought its glassy eyes shone a touch brighter in response. Breakfast the next morning consisted of the usual cereal and hot milk at the kitchen table. Diane skipped towards the table, doll in hand, deftly placing it on a chair. Vivian smiled at the quaint sight of her daughter, chatting animatedly with the doll, even offering it a bite of her cereal. The two soon grew inseparable, bringing comfort to Vivian, whose restoration work often required long hours. While Vivian worked on a little Victorian hand mirror, the sudden crash startled her, nearly causing her to drop the fragile piece. Rushing into the kitchen, she discovered the source of the noise. A plate lay shattered across the floor, and Diane's doll was discarded on the linoleum. "Diane!" The Raggedy Ann's head tilted slightly at the sound of the name. Vivian rubbed her eyes, her shoulder emitting a gentle hum of gears. "Now the gears are making me see things," she thought bitterly, recalling her opposition to the reconstruction using gears, her only option after the accident. "Mom? What happened here?" Vivian inquired, pointing to the broken plate and the discarded doll. Diane blinked, her chubby cheeks reddening. "It slipped," she admitted, grinding the toe of her shoe into the floor. "Clean up your mess and go to bed. I still have work to do, and it's late." Vivian turned to leave, but locked eyes with the doll for a moment. A chill crept down her spine. Later that night, Vivian cracked Diane's bedroom door open. The soft glow from the steam lamp illuminated her daughter's sleeping face, a round arm draped over the doll. Smiling gently, Vivian turned to leave, but her gaze fell on a scrap of paper on the floor. Though Diane was meticulous about keeping her room tidy, she also loved to draw. Assuming it was one of her drawings, Vivian quietly pocketed the paper. Leaning down, she kissed her daughter lightly and slipped out of the room. Curiosity about the note stirred within her. Illuminating it with the steam lamp revealed a clumsy scrawl in red ink. "Help me!" The gears in Vivian's shoulder tensed. It was probably just one of Diane's games. Dismissing it entirely, she crumpled the note and tossed it into the kitchen trash can. There was little time to entertain Diane's fanciful antics. A big auction for restored antiques was looming, and Vivian was pressed for time. Perhaps she would finally have enough to replace the hated gear in her shoulder with a higher quality model. She was convinced it was poisoning her slowly, yet another common side effect of shoddy gear reconstruction by a backyard mechanic. Sighing heavily, she pushed the dark thoughts from her mind, focusing instead on the work ahead. Screams tore through Vivian's sleep, distant, panicky cries laced with terror. With effort, she sat upright, realizing she had once again dozed off at her desk, bleary-eyed and covered in paint chips. The neighbors must be quarreling again. Then the screams grew louder and more desperate. Funny, they sound just like... "Diane!" Vivian bolted from her desk and raced to her daughter's bedside. Diane was screaming in her sleep, blood covering her nose and staining the doll's pajamas and pillow. "Diane!" Frantically, she shook her daughter's shoulders. "Diane, wake up!" The acrid, panicked scent filled the air. Long seconds passed before Diane awoke from her terror-filled sleep. "Mom!" the girl yelped, leaping into Vivian's arms, her clammy little body shaking. All Vivian could do was console her daughter while she babbled incoherently. Once Diane calmed, Vivian inquired about the nightmare. "I had a bad dream," Diane admitted guiltily, her cheeks flushed. Vivian sighed, wiping the dried blood from her daughter's nose. The nightmares and nosebleeds had been dormant for a long time. She should have expected their return, but Diane's therapist had assured them they were a thing of the past. Yet Vivian knew they would never truly leave. A painful reminder from the gears in her shoulder. "Do you want to tell me about your dream?" she asked, already aware it would revolve around the accident and her surgery. Diane merely shook her head. Looking pale from lack of sleep, the girl felt around for her doll. "Mom, did you see my doll? It was right here," she lamented, indicating the empty space on her pillow. "She must have fallen off the bed from all the excitement," Vivian replied, stooping to retrieve the doll, only to discover it wasn't on the floor. "There it is. But how did it get there?" Diane pointed to the door. Vivian's blood ran cold when she saw the doll slumped against the doorframe. She distinctly recalled that the doll had been next to Diane when she entered the room. "Perhaps it was flung from the bed," Vivian suggested as she picked it up. A brief inspection revealed the doll's pajamas to be clean and crisp. Shaking her head, she dismissed it as her imagination acting up, perhaps a result of the adrenaline from waking to screams combined with the pressure of the upcoming auction. Ultimately, she retreated to her fail-safe excuse. "These stupid gears are making me see things." Diane clutched her doll fiercely, while Vivian scrutinized the scene, half expecting the doll to move. But it remained limp. Feeling foolish for having entertained the notion of the doll moving, she shoved the thought aside. A clean cover was drawn over the pillow, and Diane quickly fell asleep again. Before sunrise, Vivian rose as usual to prepare breakfast. Bleary-eyed, she stumbled into the kitchen, struggling to shake off the lingering effects of last night's terrifying events. The grinding pain in her shoulder reminded her of the need for maintenance. A dreadful thought that meant another visit to that infamous backyard mechanic doctor. Just another excuse to poison my body. Dismissing the urgent need for maintenance, Vivian struck a match and lit a tea candle, placing it in the kettle's hollow base. The attractive round kettle had a homely rustic appearance. Soon, little turbines whirred, and steam poured from the spout. The comforting clicking of the turbines eased her nerves. What she needed now was a strong cup of coffee. "Mom!" Vivian glanced over her shoulder. Why would Diane be awake at this hour? Her daughter was nowhere in sight. Instead, the doll sat in Diane's usual place. Its beady eyes seemed to regard Vivian closely. She swore she saw a reddish gleam flicker in them, though it could have merely been a reflection from the orange lamplight. Diane? Her voice trembled, barely a whisper. Diane! Panic seeped into her tone. Just then, her daughter appeared in the kitchen. The frown on her face immediately vanished upon spotting the doll at the table. You found Diane! Thanks, Mom! Excitedly, she rushed to claim her doll. Didn't you put her on your chair earlier? Vivian asked, a sense of trepidation rising in her chest. No, I was looking for her when you called me. Diane's big, innocent eyes did not lie. Vivian's unease deepened when she noticed her daughter's unusual attire, a puffy sleeve lace dress with a black corset bodice. Her hair, tied in 2 low pigtails, framed her pale porcelain face, while lips stained an impossible shade of red marred her pretty visage. This transformation diverged drastically from the girl's usual preference for pants and a sweater. That's a different look, dear. Diane said I look pretty in this dress, Diane replied, nodding toward the doll, who donned an identical outfit. Don't I look pretty, Mommy? 2 distinct voices chimed, sending blood racing from Vivian's extremities. This was the final proof she needed. The gear in her shoulder was indeed poisoning her. The gears in her shoulder hissed in protest to her growing mental blame, burning pain scorching her left shoulder and forcing her to the ground with a gasp. Mommy! Diane cried, rushing to her mother's side. Vivian barely registered her daughter's frantic questions. Her gaze remained fixed on the doll, which had shifted slightly in the chair, now facing her entirely as though to ensure a clear view. Fine, Diane. Just the shoulder acting up again. It needs maintenance, Vivian reassured her. I'll call the doctor mechanic, Diane exclaimed, darting out the door before Vivian could stop her. Blood trickled down Vivian's arm. A glance revealed the gear had torn through the skin. She's mine now, a whisper echoed in Vivian's ears. Who said that? Mine, mine, mine. All mine, the voice chimed repeatedly. Vivian glanced around the kitchen, her heart racing with fear. No one else was present. Who is there? Panic warped Vivian's voice into a raspy squeal. You know who it is, the voice taunted. Locking eyes with the doll, Vivian watched as its cotton grin broadened. Beady eyes glowed with clarity, a sinister crimson hue. Little cotton arms reached out toward her as a singular utterance resonated within her mind. Mine!